Next one, our ECR shadow, our colleague TERHO.
Thank you, Chair. Dear colleagues, the ECR Group welcomes the draft on the annual tax report. We are sympathetic towards the rapporteur's notion on increasing transparency on taxation rules and regulations in the EU. Additionally, we share the rapporteur's aim to reduce administrative burden for businesses and tax authorities. Furthermore, like rapporteur, we as well acknowledge the necessity to tackle tax evasion, tax fraud, aggressive tax planning and tax havens. However, the ECR Group does not share the rapporteur's view on the level of increased tax policy harmonisation among EU member states. Taxation policy is a national competence and it should remain so in future as well. The ECR Group remains critical towards the enhanced cooperation on financial transaction tax. However, we are willing to tolerate it as long as it does not contradict with the Article 327 and 332 on the Treaty of the Functioning of the EU. In other words, it does not authorise the adoption of a tax with extraterritorial effects.
Thank you, Mr. TERHO. Now for the ALDE, our shadow, Cora von NIEUWENHUIZEN.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I would like to thank the rapporteur for the excellent job that she has done so far. She has provided us with a sound basis for the annual tax report on 2014. It was with great interest that I have taken note of the contents of the report. But since our last meeting, the world has changed radically. The LuxLeaks affair, volumes 1 and 2, have made this very clear. Across the globe, and especially within the EU, there is a strong call for the fight against tax avoidance, tax havens and aggressive tax planning. The basic idea is, of course, that all taxpayers should pay their fair share of tax. As a response to this call, ALDE proposed to install a special committee. And that has moved on, and now the decision has been taken to install 2 committees responsible for an inquiry report as well as a legislative report. And the question arises now how this annual report relates to both committees being installed. At first sight, there seems to be some overlap.
Thank you. Just for clarification, we have one committee, which is our committee, but we have 2 reports. This is Papadimoulis for the left for the Greens. Sorry, Mr. Isn't there. Can anyone speak on his behalf? I'll give the floor then to the Greens.
An die Grünen und
for the Greens, the shadow rapporteur is Scott Carter.
As Greens, we very much welcome the tone of the tax report and especially the strong focus on the need to end tax evasion, tax avoidance and tax competition in the EU. And I feel we'll be able to work constructively with the rapporteur, and I appreciate the work she has done so far. I would like to thank those members of the Parliament who have so far supported our call for an inquiry committee, and we have had support from across all the political groups. Over the past few weeks we have been looking into tax rulings in Member States, and it's not just about Luxembourg, and we're absolutely convinced that we need to use the most powerful tool available to the Parliament, which is the Parliamentary Inquiry Committee. But also, as Greens, we're concerned that we should use taxation strategically and consistently with other EU priorities. So in the year during which we're in the last chance saloon with climate negotiations, and negotiations will happen very close to us here in Paris in December, it's absolutely essential that we make progress on using tax to create the economic incentives to shift the economy of Europe in the direction of sustainability. And I believe we will have failed if we do not advance the tax agenda on energy in this particular year, this vital year for the future of our climate. A full-scale energy tax may be too ambitious for some, although we will continue to argue for it. But I believe that the tax report as it currently stands is not ambitious enough in this regard. And so we are going to we're going to put forward amendments suggesting, firstly, an end to subsidies to aviation and the ending of the exemption of aviation fuel from the tax that other fuels are subject to. Our trans-European rail services are being cut as we speak because of unfair competition from aviation and in spite of the fact that flights produce around 10 times more CO2 per mile travelled than train transport. And secondly, we're going to propose a tax on shipping fuel, which will also affect the relative prices of goods produced in the EU as a first step towards the way our current tax system attempts to price carbon lead to the export of manufacturing jobs. Thank you.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you. Just a question of procedure. The question of establishing a committee of inquiry is not dealt with in this report, but has to be done according to the provisions in the rules. Okay, that means that we have heard from all the shadow rapporteurs. I'll take any other contributions now. Mrs. Neena Gill, first of all.
Wenn sie sich von ihrem iPad löst.
If she's finished working on her iPad.
Thank you, Marcus. Can I congratulate my colleague, Eva Kaili? I think it's a very good draft report and with concrete proposals to tackle tax unfairness. What I sincerely hope is that the Commission has actually read it quite carefully, and I hope the Commission is taking note of the letter that the S&D Group has sent on this subject. And I think I and many others expect them, and that's the Commission, to come up with an ambitious legislative proposals in the coming weeks to address some of the concerns along with the way that our colleague has addressed these issues. And I am encouraged that many here in the room seem to be on the same lines, especially now that the focus is on this report, given the revelations of LuxLeaks, that these kind of practices are totally unacceptable to us. So it is important, as my colleague has proposed, that we have a stricter taxation rule and we fill the legislative gaps. But I think it's also crucial that we tackle the creative experts who set up these tax constructions, in particular major audit firms. Now, looking at the audit firms, you see that 70% of their income is generated by non-audit services. And a big part of this is tax planning services. So I do find it a bit rich that some of the colleagues here appear to be shocked by LuxLeaks and the need to take action on tax, given that they were at the forefront of light touch directive that went through this committee earlier this year. And I think it's important that we note that, so when we get those arguments, what are the consequences of this? So I think, we need to rectify this situation. We need to have concrete modifications in the other proposals as well as the ones that Eva has put forward. And I think, one of the things I would ask you, Eva, is whether, we can have a concrete and precise blacklist of areas rather than vague notions. I think that would be really helpful in terms of how we move forward on this subject. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Nina.
Thank you, Nina. And the last speaker on the list is Mr. Tang.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you. I would thank the rapporteur for an excellent report. And I'm glad to see there that the discontent about tax evasion is broad in this room, and I very much hope that we can make progress in this coming period. That would be great, and would end an injustice that the large firms can escape taxes while the small firms cannot and the normal people cannot. Let me add one point where I'm a bit concerned that if we try to construct let's say, a common consolidated tax base, that makes it a very long time. It will be a long project. And it could be a way to postpone any action on this. So even though I support, let me make clear that I support a common consolidated tax base, I'm also looking for ways to make progress very soon in a short period, because people expect that from us. And may I point out that we already have a sort of correction mechanism in Europe, that's the Code of Conduct Group, and that countries judge each other on the tax constructions. And I think it's by enforcing this Code of Conduct Group, we can make more progress. So there is already a European approach, and we can't wait for the global approach, because then we can wait until ever. But there's already a European approach which we can very much improve in a short-term notice, and then we can make significant step just by plugging the holes in the current system. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, if I've understood it correctly, the Commission does not wish to take the floor. Undoubtedly, they will be looking at what the Greens have said internally. I'll give the floor back to the rapporteur quickly, Mrs. Kaili.
So thank you very much for all your comments and suggestions. And pointing the most important things, we will take in mind everything you said, and we will of course enrich this report with more amendments that will make it even more concrete, as we had the limit of the size of this report. So everything you mentioned, almost everything will be included. I have to answer more specifically at ALDE, Cora, because legislation is here in this report, so it's presented and everything that you mentioned is covered. Investigative journalism did the job to show us how it happened. So we have the new 2 reports just to follow up on what's going on, and we will put, of course, all the proposals you mentioned. The problem with the investigation is that it hasn't been illegal until now. It's unethical and unfair, but it's not illegal. So if we move on with this action plan, we are going to prevent it from happening again. So we have asked already the Greens for different proposals, because we had problems with moving on with the energy tax as it was until now. So we're going to work on the proposals. And let me also mention, thank you all colleagues for the kind words that they said. And I have to mention that with the LuxLeaks, we reached 1% of taxation for multinationals, just 1% of billions that they make. The profit is produced in different countries, and 1% is only given to different countries. So if this checklist is we follow up, and it's our plan to act on that, we're going to prevent LuxLeaks 3, LuxLeaks 4, and anything on this direction. So the toolbox is needed now. We have to focus on transparency and effective taxation. We have to take the advantages of the internal market of 500 million citizens, 250 million citizens, and the European Parliament. And the ECON committee, we are committed to restore the confidence on fair and efficient tax systems to shape new EU tax policy. So the question that is posed from many colleagues was if tax coordination or tax harmonization is what we should focus on. So the EU semester is now a part of the economic governance where strong harmonization is imposed on the budget and expenditure side. So we stand at a critical path here. So if member states do not move to tax harmonization on the revenue side, it will be extremely difficult to achieve a real economic monetary union. So we have to answer to what we want to do here, because the lack of tax harmonization is being recognized more and more often lately, as also in the joint letter of the 3 ministers I mentioned. So this is Germany and France and Italy as one of the main causes allowing aggressive tax planning, base erosion and profit shifting from where the profit is made to another country. So I do believe that we have strong legislation and non-legislative acts presented here to prevent to face the same problems as LuxLeaks. And of course, our actions today will have to be followed up, and we have to put more pressure, not only to Commission, but also the ECOFIN, because ministers should accept and work on our proposals. I would like to thank you once again for your attention on the presentation and your very interesting remarks. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Frau Berichterstatterin.
Thank you very much, Rapporteur.